whatever application decision you make, new features, you have to think about it and keep security sort of there in focus. You can't have it as an afterthought. Because if you have it as an afterthought, you run the risk of forgetting about it or deprioritizing it. And ultimately what's going to happen then is your information is not going to be secure.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hey there. I'm Accidental CISO, and this is the Mindful Business Security Show. The word hacker often has a negative connotation to it, especially outside of the cybersecurity community. But that's where we find hackers keeping businesses safe from hackers. And if that doesn't quite make sense, keep listening because it will soon enough. In this episode, we're going to talk about an important proactive component of a security program called penetration testing. If you've never heard of it before, we'll fill you in. But first, if you haven't already subscribed, please take a moment to do that now. I'd hate to have you miss the next episode. You should be able to find the show in your favorite podcast app. My guest today has made a name for himself in the world of application security. He's an experienced penetration tester, a passionate educator, and content creator. As the co-host of the Across the Pondcast, he offers a transatlantic perspective as he breaks down cybersecurity trends, current events, and tough questions in the industry. He's the author of Auto Recon, a hacking tool that is used to discover and learn about computer networks during the Offensive Security Certified Professional Certification exam. This year at DEF CON, one of the biggest cybersecurity conferences in the world, he will host 3 brand new game shows for conference attendees. And when he needs a break from high-tech hacking, he enjoys picking locks for fun. Lock sport, if you want to be fancy. It's great to have you here with me today. Welcome to the show, Tiberius.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Before we jump into the penetration testing stuff, though, I want to hear a little more about the game shows at DEF CON that you're going to be doing, because that's coming up here in just a couple of months. Can you tell our listeners just a little more about that? Because they may not be familiar with the hacker cons and the significance of the game shows at hacker cons. And if you could also fill us in on how you came into that opportunity, because this sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so DEF CON is an unusual hacker convention, I would say. It's obviously the largest. It just has so much variety of things that you can do. There are obviously the talks, but there are these things called villages, which are effectively rooms dedicated to a certain subject within cybersecurity. So there's a car hacking village, for example. There's a lock-picking village, which is nice. And yeah, they're just sort of mini cons almost within the actual con itself. There are events, there are parties, and then there are also the contests. I think there's about 75 official contests this year. So that's just to give you a kind of scale. Some of the contests run the entire length of the con. Like there's a scavenger hunt contest. So you sign up and you get a list of things you have to find throughout the con. There are other types, which are the game shows. There aren't too many game shows, I think. I run 2 of them. Yeah, how I ended up running them is kind of funny. So for years, I was running it's a version of Family Feud, but with cybersecurity survey questions. I was running it for a group of friends, basically a hacker group that I'm associated with. And it was 100% off the books. We kind of just found an empty room, hope nobody kicked us out. Sometimes they did. And then one year somebody suggested, hey, you should just apply to be an official contest and then you can't get kicked out of rooms. And I honestly didn't realize that was a thing that you could do. So applied. I actually submitted for 2 contests. So the Family Feud one and then a completely brand new one, because I figured, hey, there's more chances of me getting one if I apply for 2, right? And then they just approved both. So I was like, I kind of shot myself in the foot there. That was last year. So ran those both and then applied again for them this year and got approved again. So I think I'm in with those contests for the future.
And it sounded like there was at least one of them was brand new this year. Is that right?
So yeah, two of them. So this is the thing. Contests are, I think, the correct definition at DEF CON anyway is you have to be able to enter a contest somehow. That might be a pre-registration sort of phase before the actual convention, or it might be you can just sign up at the day. So that's true for the two contests I run. The other one is an event. It's still a game show. It's just we've already got the 3 contestants that are going to be playing it. It's more of an entertainment thing than an actual contest. But that one's brand new this year.
The folks that attend these HackerCons, especially DEF CON, they come from all over the world. They're sharing their research, learning from each other, networking, socializing, like you said, like, parties and all of that sort of thing as well. What's interesting, at least to me, about the hacker community, though, is the spectrum of intent, maybe is a good word, which makes hacker a loaded word because you've got, sort of the good hackers and the bad hackers. Um, so what does it mean to you to be a hacker in the first place?
Yeah, so there's it's often said there's like 3 types of hacker. There's black hat, white hat, and then gray hat. So the idea being black hats are the ones who are actually committing crimes. White hats are the ones doing all the helping. Gray hats are somewhere in the middle. So not necessarily they don't go out to commit crimes, but they might find a system and probe it, and then tell the owner about it. So not necessarily hacking with permission, but the goal is always good. I actually get a lot of flack from people online because I kind of subscribe to this far more open definition of hacker than I think most people do. For me, it's all about the mindset. And I feel like if you have this hacker mindset, for me, you're a hacker. And what that means is you have to be curious, you enjoy figuring out how things work, and you're also almost obsessive about breaking stuff or getting around restrictions. So I didn't mention tech there, and I think that's important. I don't think hackers should really be restricted to just breaking into computer systems or networks. Like there's an entire branch of hacking called social engineering, which is also known as hacking the human. It's about exploiting the human weaknesses that are present in every system pretty much. So you don't really need to find a vulnerability in a computer system if you can get into the network by convincing someone to let you in, right? And so that's what a hacker is for me. I don't think we should be so restrictive as to say you have to hack computers to be a hacker. I think, there's a social engineering village at DEF CON. It's one of the most popular villages there. And if I think, if the most popular village at the most popular hacker convention in the world is social engineering and not really quote unquote technical, I think that probably says a lot.
I subscribe to that same sort of definition that you do. It's about the mindset and how does it work as a system? What weaknesses there may be, but also just how do I make it do what I want it to do? Maybe not always what it was intended to do. And, what else can it do? Like just thinking that way and that approach that's sort of outside the box, to use a probably overused phrase, but just approaching things differently, approaching systems differently, problems differently, those kinds of things. Folks that build systems as well and just innately understand how they work and how they operate and how to make them do things that they weren't intended to do. That gets us a little closer to the actual topic then today. The term penetration testing is probably really new to folks in our audience who aren't cybersecurity professionals. So, can you talk a little bit about what penetration testing is, what it entails, and why a company would want to do that in the first place?
Penetration testing, or pen testing for short, we like to say, is effectively where you have someone pretend to be a malicious actor and then see how far into a computer system they can get. So how far they can penetrate, right? That's where the word comes from. And that's by finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. As to why a company might want to do that, the answer is pretty much because whether you like it or not, malicious actors are out there, and they will at some point likely attack part of your business. So the purpose of the pen test is to kind of simulate that, see what that might look like, but with an attacker who's on your side, and effectively can then tell you, okay, this is how I got into your network, this is how I got into your application, right? And all the things I could potentially do from there. So that's why a business might want to do that.
And there are different types of pen tests as well. It's not just like there's only one kind. We say we want to do a pen test, and like that's clear. You call up the pen tester, the firm that does this. Yeah, I need a pen test. Like they're going to start asking a bunch of questions. So what are sort of the maybe the main types of pen tests that are typical that are done for clients, and what should the business leaders be thinking, or how should they approach deciding which kind of test they actually need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're a small business, you probably might not even start out with an internal network. You might start out with just using online services, but you might have a website, right? And so an external pen test would be effectively attacking whatever your external infrastructure is. So that just might be your website. Like you have a website hosted somewhere. It was, you paid whatever amount of money for a developer to design it, but it's got some features. It's got a contact form. It might have a login page for some reason. So you want that to be tested. So that would pretty much be classed under an external pen test. If it's an in-depth web application, so if it's not just your website, but there's some kind of service that you run that your customers can sign into, that would require a more in-depth web application test. And then if you are at the point where you do have an internal, if you have an office, for example, and you have a bunch of people working connected to the same network, that would be an internal network penetration test. You would basically hire a pen tester to come in, basically plug their laptop into your internal network somewhere and see what they can get at as a completely unauthenticated user. So I would say those are probably the three main types.
Yeah, and sometimes the leaders who hire these folks, like they'll tell their team this person's coming in to do it. Sometimes they don't, and the pen testers actually are part of the test is to gain access to the building.
That's usually called red teaming, and there will definitely be, if there are red teamers listening to the episode, there will be people angry that you just compared that to pen testing. Generally speaking, red teamers and pen testing are seen as sort of related but separate entities, effectively. So it's certainly true that they use the same skill set, but yeah, a red team engagement looks very different from a pen test engagement. You might pen test a small internal network in 3 days, for example, but a red teaming engagement might take upwards of a month, just because you have a lot of background work to do, and it does involve breaking and entering potentially, and trying to find as many vulnerabilities as possible, really.
I didn't realize that that there was that division, because I had sort of always referred to that piece of as a physical penetration test, and just a different type. But I hadn't considered that the folks that do those prefer to have it framed a different way. That's interesting. I'll correct myself in the future so I don't.
Well, there is a physical pen test aspect of it, so you can just get a physical pen test. But if you're looking for the whole sort of breaking, entering, trying to find vulnerabilities in the network, or potentially even social engineering, that whole sort of engagement is a red team engagement. So yeah, I probably misspoke a little bit, but absolutely, physical pen testing is a thing. I think it's mostly just thrown in with a red team usually, though.
And I've mostly been on the buying side of pen tests as a CISO. especially working in startups, tech startups, companies that are building SaaS platforms. I'm usually the guy hiring somebody to come and test our systems. So I'm not a penetration tester myself. I've done a little bit of that type of stuff, but not formally as that. It's just been part of my job as a sysadmin when I've had to like bail somebody out to get access to something that we've managed to get ourselves locked out of, or something like that. So I know when I've done penetration tests before, depending on the company with the application tests that you were talking about, sometimes the testers don't have a lot of information about the application to begin with. And other times they're given access to the source code as well. So, if you've got the sort of, white box testing, I think is how I've usually referred to that, but the testers actually can review the code itself to look for things that they think might be vulnerabilities, and then during the test, actually confirm those as well. It's rare, I think, and I'm curious in your experience if that's rare, because that gets very expensive because it takes quite a bit of time to actually review the code and that sort of thing too. Is that something that you see come up regularly at that level of a test?
It's definitely rarer to have source code than to not. And the company I currently work at, NetSpy, we do have a secure code review team, effectively, who basically do that. But I would say most of our pen tests are application pen tests without source code. And yeah, it just gets it gets a bit more complicated, and it is sort of a double-edged sword because you will likely find more vulnerabilities if you give a pen tester access to the source code. The downside of that is it'll also take a lot longer because part of that is going to be reading the source code. And there's something to be said that these days there are so many automated source code review engines now that some of that work I feel is going to be largely automated. Mm-hmm. There are still a lot of things that source code review it's just harder to find, especially for automation. And so that's where you still kind of need pen testing.
A lot of times the clients that I'm working with, the decision they end up usually having to make is, do we want to do an external network penetration test, or do we want to do an application penetration test for our SaaS apps? And when it comes to that specific decision, what do you like to advise clients on, like, what they should be thinking about to decide, do we just do an external or do we do the application test?
Yeah, so an external pen test, if there are web applications found, and there undoubtedly will be, usually you'll just have a sort of surface level scan. So the example I used before, it was a website. If all your external infrastructure is literally just a website that you have, and let's just say it doesn't even have a login, right? It's just a website that has a contact form that says stuff about your business, lists the board, whatever. An external infrastructure scan might be good enough, right? If it's such a static site that there's hardly any like dynamic functionality, a external pen tester might take a look at it and be like, well, I've been given 3 days to scan the external infrastructure. It's just a website. I'll do I'll do surface level testing. I'll submit the form. I'll see what happens. I'll try and do stuff with that. And that might be enough. If it's anything more complicated, like if there is a login, for example, or if there's like especially like a customer login, say you have like a login for customers so they can download reports or invoices or something like that. I don't know any pen testing company that would cover that with an external pen test. They would say, well, no, that's application functionality level, so we need an application test. And so that's where I think you have to draw the line.
And when there's logins, is it common then also that you'd give like test accounts to the testers as well, so they could do some authenticated testing as a user in the system when you start doing the application test? Okay.
Yeah. So web application tests, if there is a login, generally there will be You'll provide testers with test accounts, often multiple types. And yeah, part of the testing will be, okay, log in as user A, see what I can do. Log in as user B, see what they can do. Can I access stuff from user A using user B? Stuff like that. And external infrastructure tests are generally unauthenticated. We will generally, if you find a login form just randomly, like, as on the website, you might try and brute force some credentials. You might see if it'll, if there's an admin user, are they using a weak password? But if you do get in that way, you probably aren't going to try anything more, because it'll just at that point kind of be out of scope. But a web application pen test would definitely go further and do that deep dive authenticated scanning.
And then when the test is done, what sort of like information or what sort of deliverables should a small business owner, small business leader expect that they're going to receive at the end of this penetration test, and what do they do with that?
Yeah, so for most types of pen test, there's going to be a report, and that report will list the scope that was agreed, and then it will go and usually list the actual vulnerabilities that were found. So it'll a good pen test report, I should say, will list the vulnerabilities. It'll explain each one, what the actual vulnerability is. It'll put it in context of the application. There will usually be a whole bunch of evidence. So there might be screenshots, there might be example HTTP requests that are being sent, right, and received. There might be a proof of concept script. And the most important thing is there's going to be a recommendation for that vulnerability, which is, how do I fix this, right? And a good pen test report, there will be multiple options for how you fix it, right? Because some vulnerabilities you can fix in multiple different ways. And so that's generally what the report will look like. Some of them will also have an executive summary, which will basically go over, like, at a high level, say, okay, here are the vulnerabilities we found. This is what the risk is for your business, effectively. So it's more of it's an executive summary because it's for executives, effectively. But what you would do with that, I mean, that depends on who you are as a customer. And why you're getting a pen test, because there are certain customers who are only getting a pen test because they have to be compliant with something. And so, and the compliancy just says you have to get a pen test. It doesn't necessarily say you have to fix anything, right? Or you might have to fix the highs, but you can ignore the lows and mediums. And that's severity, I should say. You can ignore the low and medium severities, but fix the highs. And that might just be what you do. You might take the report and give it to your developers and say, fix the high stuff. Or if you're getting a pen test because you actually care about security, you might read through it with a fine-tooth comb and literally, tell your devs, we need to fix all of this, or we at least need to fix the highs, the mediums. Maybe we can try some of the lows. And also we're going to, retrain some of you and put you on secure coding courses, because this stuff shouldn't have ever got in there. So that's the two general perspectives I see.
And you mentioned the why, and I love that. Like, that's a huge part of my consulting and on the show as well. Understanding, I hope people understand why they're doing the things that they're doing, so they can be more strategic and mindful about it, and not just doing things because somebody said, "Oh, you should do this thing." When a business is building and maturing their security program, and this happens a ton, especially in the small orgs that I work in, they're generally coming into their first penetration test, and they're having to decide, like, when's the right time to introduce penetration testing into their security program. Any guidance that you like to offer clients as you're talking with them on when they should start doing penetration tests and determining, like, is this the right time? Are they ready for this?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm not sure there's any good answer to it. Because I know the answer I want to give is immediately, right? As soon as you form a business, that's it. You need to be thinking about pen testing. Obviously, that's unrealistic, right? I think you got to think in terms of risk. right? So if you are a small business and you have 3 employees and they're all your friends, right? You've worked with them for years, maybe as co-workers before, then do you need an internal network pen test if you're just 3 people in an office? Probably not, right? If you can keep up with patches and everything, sure, that's pretty good, I guess. If you just have a small website that is static, maybe it's just hosted in I don't know, hosted by GitHub pages or whatever. If it's just a really staticky site that doesn't have any dynamic stuff at all, do you need that pen tested? Probably not. It's all about defining risk. As soon as you start putting important data in an area that attackers can potentially get to it, that's when you probably need to start thinking about pen testing. And so if you do have that, if you suddenly think, oh, well, we could probably get a customer portal so they can log in, and let's just say you write applications, right? And they can download their applications, or they can download invoices, or make payments through an application. That's when you probably start thinking about having a pen test, because then you've got customer data that is accessible via the internet. If you've grown to the point where you have quite a large number of employees, and you suspect that maybe patch management has sort of slipped and it's just getting harder to sort of monitor the network, maybe you've had a disgruntled employee at some point, because that's another thing people forget about is insider threats are real, right? Attackers aren't always just random people on the internet, right? An attacker could be a disgruntled employee who decides at the end of the day, well, they're going to fire me, so I might as well, try and mess with their system, take some data, sell it to a competitor or something, right? So that's when you might start thinking about, okay, well, we need to get an internal pen test and actually see, okay, well, if we just have this random user, if we just have a low-level user, what can they actually get at? Can they do anything that an admin is only supposed to be able to do? And so I think you've got to define it in terms of risk to both your business and also your customers. And that's when you should really, if there is any kind of risk, any kind of real risk to that, maybe think about having a pen test.
Yeah. I often see a business driver for pen tests come through clients that are doing things like SOC 2 or high trust, where they're doing some sort of a certification or there's an audit, and that particular standard that they're being audited against includes some requirements around application security. And for instance, SOC 2 doesn't necessarily require a penetration test. It's a good way to meet the requirements. And it's often a way that your customers who are demanding the SOC 2 report are often looking to see the business achieve that. And oftentimes they want to see the pen test report as well, sometimes depending how deep they want to look in that. So I see it customer driven as well, where the clients end up doing it for the first time, honestly, because the customer wants them to have SOC 2. Usually it's a very big customer. And then as part of SOC 2, they end up introducing that as well. And the decision gets made for them frequently. But it is a hard decision. And if we flip that around, is there any times when you would advise a client or an organization, like, don't do a pen test, like you're not ready?
That's a difficult question to answer. I think if you're not ready to deal with the potential results, then maybe not. If you're going to get the report and do absolutely nothing with it, then it's probably just a waste of money at that point. And you can probably invest in security in a much better way.
I think it comes down to liability sometimes. And I think you were kind of getting at that, where if you have a pen test done and you get this report, and now you know this stuff, but you don't intend to do anything about it, or you don't do anything about it. Like, now that becomes a liability where, this is negligence or something. So I think that's kind of an area too, where if an organization's, at least as I'm working with small orgs, like if their program isn't mature enough to even be able to do something with that information yet, like it's too early. And then before we go to the phones here, real quick, I love to ask this last question because everybody gives me such different answers and they're always so interesting. If you had a magic wand and you could wave this magic wand in the air and have every small business owner, small business leader instantly know and understand something about security, what would that one thing be?
I think it applies to every business leader, not just small businesses, but there's no such thing as a secure system. It doesn't exist. You can't just have a single pen test, fix every vulnerability that's found, and then just think you're safe. Because environments are constantly changing, right? There's new vulnerabilities that will be introduced. Maybe one was missed, right? Pen tests are not perfect. Pen testers are human. They're given a limited amount of time to test your network. They're going to miss stuff. Even if your application code doesn't change, right? There may be new vulnerabilities introduced in libraries that it uses on the server that it's running on, right? And realistically, the only solution is to keep security at the forefront of your mind, right? It should be just part of how you do business.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice. I love that. All right. So we've got some callers here on the phones ready to ask some questions about penetration testing. So are you ready to take questions and help some folks out today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
Our first caller on the show today is Jared from Cape Town, South Africa. I love that we've got folks calling in from all over the world on the show here. Jared, welcome to the show. How can we help you today?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my question, I'm starting a bit of a pen testing or a cybersecurity business, and one of the offerings I want to provide is pen testing. But my question is really concerns both the pen testing side of things, but also the small business owners. And it's really a good segue from previously, just asking about how do we make sure that everyone is protected as much as you can negotiate scope ahead of time and ensure that you're on the same page. From an insurance perspective, what kinds of must-have insurance should you have from a cybersecurity company as well as from a small business?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I'll have to preface this with I don't really do anything with insurance side of stuff. Like I work for a consultancy, they probably handle all of that. Um, I would imagine if you're going into it alone, there's probably some personal liability insurance that you can get. I imagine if you're making an entire consultancy, there's business liability insurance as well. I don't know if there's specific insurance for a pen test consultancy. There might be, but to sort of, I know that's probably not the answer you were looking for. To sort of maybe adjust it, there are obviously ways that you can try and reduce risk, right? So obviously, pen testing is inherently dangerous. We are basically sending malicious traffic into a network at an application. The potential for things to crash, to fall over, for data to be deleted is non-zero, right? It's rare that it happens, I will say that. But there are definitely ways in which you can, as a pen test consultancy, advise your customers on how to reduce risk. And if you are seeking out a pen test, there are definitely ways in which you can be proactive about reducing risk. One of those is, okay, well, if let's just say you're testing an application, have you got a staging environment, right? So don't test in production. If you have a staging environment that you can give the tester access to, that's a good way of reducing risk because at least with the staging environment, you're not touching production data, you're not touching production code, you still have your production environment there. The other thing you can do is make backups, right? We always advise our customers, okay, so you have a database, can you back up the database before the test? And then, if anything does happen, you can just restore from that backup as if the test never happened. If there's infrastructure that you think might have a risk of falling over just because there's a lot of traffic happening, you could ask a pen test consultancy to test out of hours, right? At the weekend, maybe. A lot of them will be willing to do that. They might charge a little bit extra for it. It really depends on the consultancy. But that's definitely something you can do. And the additional thing, if you're a customer and okay, there's this really weird function that's been causing us some trouble in the past, but we still need to get a pen test, you can tell them, hey, this area, this application form over here, just be a little bit careful with it, right? Because if you poke it too hard, if you poke it too often, it has sort of crashed stuff in the past. And you can tell that. In fact, pen testers would absolutely love you if you told them as much stuff about the application as possible in terms of, where to go, what the application actually does, which bits are critical, which bits you think, might have specific vulnerabilities in them, right? Pen testers will love that because that means they can plan better when they actually do their pen test, and ultimately you'll get a better result.
On the business side of things, a couple things to keep in mind. And my knowledge is on the United States side of things and the laws and the way things work here. Every country is going to be different. But if you have something in South Africa that is similar to the LLC, the limited liability company that we have in the United States, I would strongly recommend that you have that in place, and that your contracts for doing stuff as penetration tester are signed as the firm, as the company, not you personally. And then, there's some other business things you have to be aware of, at least in the United States, like commingling funds and those types of things can get you in trouble, to where if you were sued, lawyers may be able to, pierce the corporate veil is what they call it here, when you haven't necessarily run your business where it is like completely separate from you personally, and to where they can go after you personally. Because in the States, the LLC is supposed to give you some protection. It's not a magic bullet, but some protection personally, your personal assets, your house, your car, your investments, things like that, if your business gets sued. And then on the insurance side of things, your business, you're going to want to have general business insurance. Obviously, if your equipment gets damaged or things like that, insurance would potentially cover equipment that you can't afford to lose, and business liability insurance there. But I think there's some professional liability insurance you're going to want to get. So errors and omissions insurance is something that you'll probably want to look at as a consultant. And at least over here in the States, and with the provider that I'm using, the errors and omissions also includes the cyber liability. And so that's another thing, because when you're working with customer data, getting into their systems, and you're potentially taking screenshots or downloading evidence that you were able to penetrate into their system, you may have sensitive data of theirs in your possession. And if something happens where you end up being breached and somebody gets access to that, you're going to want that cyber insurance there to support you. In the contract, if there's some sort of like mutual indemnification clause in the contract, you're probably going to want that as well, so that if something happens, both companies will indemnify the other, like, to hold harmless, but also to help defend if something goes wrong and you get sued by one of their customers because you took down their system, that they would help defend you in the process of that. It is kind of the way that indemnification clause would help you there. And that's a kind of an important other thing that I want to mention to business owners who are looking at how do we make sure we're covered when we're doing penetration tests. And Tiberius, I love your suggestion of doing it in a test environment. Something that's common enough that it annoys me is customers wanting in the contract to be allowed to conduct their own penetration tests against my company's SaaS products. As a CISO, that's something I always want to strike out of contracts. I don't want customers coming and pen testing my production systems. And it's not because we're afraid of what they're going to find, because it's true, some kid in their mom's basement can run the, similar port scans and things. So it's not necessarily about that, but it's more about the kind of professional liability that's there. Because if I have a system where I have SLAs with my clients, and during the pen test if some other customer is running a pen test and they do something that takes the system down, and then I owe penalties to my other clients, my other customers, because the pen tester took the system down, that's not cybercrime. My cyber insurance is not going to cover that because we've given permission to the tester to do this. Like, this is now an operational problem, and we're going to be on the hook to pay, the SLA charges on those. So I strongly recommend that business owners, especially SaaS businesses and stuff, have the testing done in an environment that replicates the production environment, but be very careful about testing in production and not allowing customers and other people to test in production. Because if something happens, your other protections and controls to help manage risks around cyber events may not help you the way that they normally would if it was actual criminal activity that took your system down.
Thanks so much. That's a really thorough and thought out answer. I wonder if I could just have like a follow-up question, which is maybe a little bit more fun. Um, and it's really about red flags. And again, it's like a bit of a symmetric question. From the small medium business owner point of view, you're engaging a pen testing firm. What are some red flags that you would be wanting to look out for when you're working with this firm? And then similarly, you're a pen testing firm and you're engaging a client, small, medium business. What are some red flags that you might want to be looking out for?
That's a great question. It is a fun question, actually. It's fun that I should probably be very careful in what I say. I obviously haven't done much in the way of, customer side of things asking for a pen test. I would say if you're the immediate red flag that I've heard about, at least, is you go, inquire about a pen test, you submit like a form on the website, and they immediately like come back to you with like a quote of this many days. That's a red flag, because okay, I haven't given you any actual context. I've just told you, okay, well, it's a web application. We need a web application pen test. Maybe it's like, I said, they asked for number of pages, number of users, right, roles, etc. Okay, you can kind of calculate that, but no company should be really selling a pen test outright without doing some kind of scoping call and going over the application and understanding the actual problem. So that would be a red flag for me. I also think there are definitely companies out there that probably think too much of themselves in terms of they think they've invented the next greatest pen test report, and realistically it's just giving too much information. And so one red flag is if a pen test report is honestly too big and it contains a lot of information that doesn't seem useful to you, you've got to think, okay, well, somebody had to write up that information, and that just took a lot of time. And that time could have been probably better spent actually doing the pen test. So that's another red flag, I would say, is if you have these huge reports that don't list too many vulnerabilities, but just have a lot of sort of filler material. That would be a red flag for me.
On that note, too, I like to ask for like a sample report, like a redacted kind of sample report, just to get a feel for what the reports look like. Because I've been given reports like, what you're talking about, Tiberius, where it's, way too much, a lot of filler. But I have also seen reports where I don't want to say it's not human readable, but it's so dense technically that there hasn't been much analysis and synthesis put to it to frame what's actually wrong, why it's a problem, and what to do about it clearly, to the point where it diminishes the value of the report, because then the systems administrators and the developers and the folks who actually have to interpret it have difficulty figuring out, like, what's this even mean?
There's sort of the classic where you take a scan, like a vulnerability scanner report, and just stick the company logo on it. There are a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, there are several companies that just run Nessus, which is a very popular vulnerability scanner for a network, and they'll take the Nessus report and they'll just put their logo on it and edit it a little bit, and that's your pen test. It's like, that's not a pen test. That's a vulnerability scan. So, yeah. In terms of customers with red flags, I think the only one that really springs to mind is when you have customers who treat the pen test as, or the pen testers, I should say, as attackers, like not on your side. All right. Yes, we're attackers, but ultimately our goal is to help you. And I think there are quite a few developers and sysadmins who have a little bit too much pride in, their network or their application. And whenever you find a flaw with it, they take that personally. And that's a huge red flag, because I think everybody understands nobody's perfect. And so you shouldn't take that personally. You should just be you should be glad that somebody came along and pointed out, oops, the mistake was made there. Hey, let's fix it. So that would be my answer for the red flags that I haven't encountered it much in the past. I will say that, but I have definitely encountered customers who are far more antagonistic than they need to be.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, Jared. Hope this was helpful.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you so much for having me.
Our next caller on the phone today is Jim from Buffalo. Jim, welcome to the show. How can we help you?
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm a CTO for an application. It's a web application called Request Tracker. And we've done penetration testing in the past, working with customers. And what we're kind of working through now is thinking about how things change when you move into a cloud-based environment. So we're specifically in AWS, but I think the concepts that we're thinking about are probably the same for the other clouds as well. So one of the first thoughts we had is, as we have started to deploy into the cloud, there's a lot of other infrastructure that's not necessarily our application, but it's there, right? So I'm thinking about like load balancers. AWS has the web application firewall, the WAF, that can kind of sit in front of your application. And I'm assuming that when you want to do a penetration test, you probably don't want that stuff in the environment when you're doing your testing, even if it's how we might deploy, just because then it seems like you're probably testing AWS more than you're testing our application. But is that true? And how do you kind of work with that, with the infrastructure that you're working through just to get to the application that you're trying to test?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. This is a question we get asked a lot, which is like basically, hey, we have a WAF. What do we do about the WAF? And my go-to answer, and it really doesn't matter if it's AWS or anything. You might even have, a dedicated hosting system and you have a WAF installed yourself. My question I always ask is, well, do you want a pen test of your app or do you want a pen test of your WAF? And usually the answer is, well, we want to know, what vulnerabilities are in the app. And then the answer is simple. Well, okay, disable the WAF, add us to the allow list, whatever. Let us test the application. And customers usually react pretty well for that. There are some that get a little uneasy. It's like, well, but we paid all this money for this WAF. We want to know it's doing its job, right? And that makes sense. So the way that all the companies that I've worked at it have sort of got around this issue is, okay, well, you care about the vulnerabilities in your app firstly, but you also care about, okay, am I protected by a WAF? So here's what we'll do. It's a 5-day pen test. First 4 days, maybe 4.5 days, let's test with the WAF turned off. or with us allow listed. We'll find all the vulnerabilities we can. On the 5th day, we'll send you an email, say, okay, switch the WAF back on. And then we'll just literally go through all the vulnerabilities that we found in the previous 4 or 4.5 days, and we'll test them with the WAF on. And we'll tell you in the report, hey, once the WAF was on, actually this attack got blocked. And that gives you important context because it means you still know there's a vulnerability there, right? Mm-hmm. And WAFs are not perfect. WAF bypasses get released all the time. Mm-hmm. So you know there's a vulnerability, you still have to fix it. We're obviously not going to recommend in the report, oh, well, the WAF blocked it, it's fine. It's still going to be marked as a critical, right? Mm-hmm. Or a high or whatever. But you at least know that, okay, the WAF is currently blocking it, so it's a slightly lower priority. We have time. It's not like you have an unauthenticated SQL injection that you suddenly need to fix immediately, all right? Because the WAF is technically blocking it. You have a little breathing room. And it also just tells you, okay, well, the WAF is actually working. So you get sort of the best of both worlds, I feel, with that approach. And that's how, like I said, I've done it for years now. And I honestly think it's probably the best approach because you get the vulnerabilities, you know exactly what you should fix, but you also get to determine, okay, which order do we fix stuff in?
Right. Yeah. And especially if customers can download your application and deploy it in a way that's not exactly like you're deploying it, you really want to know that yes, you're protected in your environment with the WAF, but you need to fix it in the application.
Yeah. So. And another function of the WAF that's also important in that infrastructure, though, is monitoring and alerting. And so when you test with you want to know what stuff's there, as Tiberius was saying, what vulnerabilities are there, but having that testing with the WAF in place and active is very important because not only do you want to know what's blocked, what's visible through that still, that you may need to, make some adjustments to the WAF too, if maybe there's something you can kind of patch in the meantime in the WAF and write some custom rules to protect some vulnerabilities until you have a chance to fix them. Mm-hmm. But monitoring is really key. And so when you do the testing with the WAF, you can also kind of test, like, is our monitoring working? Like, are we getting alerts that we would expect to get with this kind of activity with somebody doing these things? Is it logged the way we expect? And is our alerting, is that detecting it? And are we getting the alerts? And are people that are getting the alerts, like now that they see that alert, would they know what to do if that came up? So you've got some really valuable information that you can get around monitoring, alerting, and response capabilities that come out of testing with that WAF on as well. So I definitely recommend trying to do both if you can.
Yeah. And that's actually a great lead into another question that I had. So taking that context, if you're thinking about, scenario where you are saying, okay, here's just the raw EC2 instance. I want you to also go directly at the application. Are there things that potentially could go off in terms of alarms and monitoring and things like that? And I'm thinking both, like, should we contact, for example, on AWS, should we contact support on AWS and say, hey, we're having some testing done, so some nasty stuff might be coming in, but we know. And then also, should we expect, like, say we're running something like guard duty, should we expect to be seeing things going off? And actually, it's interesting, you kind of said it in your last thing, you might actually have that as part of your test. We expect things to go off maybe as you do that. But how does that work? Do you usually have to contact your cloud provider and let them know that something's going on?
So that's going to depend on the cloud provider for sure. I do know for AWS, when AWS first came out, and I was pen testing when it first came out, it was an absolute nightmare because you had this 2-page long form that the customer had to fill out, and then the pen test consultancy had to fill out, and then you had to send it to AWS, and then they had to sort of approve it, and it was just any sort of AWS hosted pen test was like, oh, we need at least 2 weeks in advance notice just to fill out this form. Thankfully, they got away with that quite a few years ago now. I believe there's a page on their website which lists, here are all the services you can pen test against, and you don't have to tell us. And there's also a list of, here are all the attacks that you aren't allowed to execute against certain services. Or, I don't think you're allowed to attack the 53, the DNS right? Which makes sense. I imagine it's very similar for other cloud providers. They probably don't require you to let them know. It's more that they sort of assume it's going on these days. As for logging, yeah, I mean, I think most WAFs, most security logging, I believe there's, like I mentioned, allow listing. There's usually a way to sort of mark an IP address as, okay, well, this IP address we're going to let through, but we still want to log, anything that's triggered, right? So any rules that it kind of violates, we're going to allow it, but we still want to log it. And that's probably what you want to do as well, because you want to see that that monitoring is actually working properly without actually blocking it.
I've always, even though AWS doesn't require it anymore, I generally will still contact the support and just open a support case and just let them know, hey, we're going to be doing this these dates, these times, just in case. And we're not required to, but we always have a support contract. At least in the organizations I've worked in, and my clients who are SaaS providers, they always have a support contract on their production environment, and a lot of times in their staging environments as well, to help solve issues. And I think it's nice just to give them a heads up. And if there is a problem, you've got already a ticket open to kind of anchor stuff in now going forward to keep all that together.
Yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, my last question is around sort of setting up the pen test when you get to the application. And obviously there's a certain amount of things you can do for an application that has a login, just kind of poking at the outside and, confirming that, hey, all these things are blocked as they should be. But I think for much of your testing, you're going to need access to actually get in the application so you can start poking around and, injecting things in forms and things like that. How does that usually work in terms of coordinating which accounts you're given, and then what context do you need as a penetration tester to know, like, for example, for Request Tracker, you can have everything from like a very limited self-service user that can see like just their tickets, everything up to a super user who can do everything in the application. What sort of things do you need as a penetration tester to do most of the things that you want to do around, the security and things that you're usually looking for?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's actually one we get a lot. So with web applications specifically, it might surprise you, the number one vulnerability in web applications for years has been access control. And there's various types of access control, but there are sort of two major ones, and that's they're called vertical and horizontal privilege escalation. I don't tend to like those terms, but I'll use them because it kind of is nice to visualize. So with vertical privilege escalation, it's where you have a low-level user who can access or use admin level functionality. Horizontal privilege escalation is where you have, say you have two types or two users at the same user level, and they can access resources that belong to each other. All right. A good example would be, okay, user A can update user B's profile, right? Maybe set their username or something, or set their password. So those are two types of access control violation, incredibly common. Also incredibly hard for automated testing to find. There's a lot of just context you need. So the simple answer to what accounts do we need is unfortunately all of them. So it can obviously depend if you have a sort of a scaling application where you have role-based access control, but below the role-based, there's sort of like there's an admin level user who has access to absolutely everything, and then there's like a low-level user who has read access to only one thing. There's the potential to be like, okay, well, if you give us one of the read-only users and one of the admin level users, we can at least try and access admin level functionality from the low level user, right? But most of the time, access control is so complicated that it makes more sense to just be like, okay, well, there are 5 user roles in this application. Give us an account on each actually give us 2 because we still need to do that horizontal privilege escalation. And so you end up sort of with giving us like 10 different accounts for an application. It gets even more complicated if you have a multi-tenant solution. So you have, say, customer level accounts where a customer can have a super admin, right? Mm-hmm. And another customer can have a super admin. And they're both super admins, but they're on different tenants. They have access to strict limited data. But now you've introduced a new access control issue, which is cross-tenant access control. You never want customer A to be able to access customer B's stuff. And that's sort of a level beyond it's kind of similar to horizontal privilege escalation, but it's sort of just it's a little bit more dangerous. And in that case, it's another instance of, well, we'll need 2 tenants then, and we'll need a set of accounts, at least one set of accounts for one of the tenants to test that kind of cross-tenant access control issues. And the unfortunate reality is that adds complexity to the pen test, which adds time, which adds cost. And there's no simple solution to it, unfortunately, especially when you have access control being the number one vulnerability found in web applications today. That's definitely something you need to test.
The way I usually try to approach that complexity that Tiberius is talking about is I try to think in terms of personas. And usually the minimum number of personas that you're going to have is you've got an internal sort of admin kind of account that's going to be used for provisioning services for new tenants, new customers, and supporting the customers. So you have an internal admin of some sort. Your customers will have some sort of an admin account as well, persona that can create their own users and set the settings, organization-wide settings. And then you've got the individual end user accounts that are actually the users of the system. And generally you have 2 tenants to test that cross-tenant access control. So kind of at a minimum, you end up with 2 tenants with 2 personas in each, plus your top persona. So your minimum ends up really being 2 tenants and 5 accounts, an internal admin, 2 customer admins, and 2 customer end user roles when you want to get this kind of thorough coverage to test this. So I think going in, like, that's usually the starting place where we know it's going to be at least that on most like SaaS web applications that get tested when I've been working with these.
Yeah, and it almost sounds like if you have a partner then who's doing the penetration testing, you might want to think of it as more of a longer term sort of relationship, because if they do kind of create these profiles for you, then they can do repeated testing, especially if there's findings, right? You want to be able to, okay, run that test again in 3 months when we've had a chance to tackle these. And then you can, I'm assuming, reuse those profiles once you've kind of learned more about the application and the users and things.
That rerunning the test actually is great that you mentioned that, because that's also really important. Is I have never bought a penetration test where I haven't wanted the testers to come back and do sort of a retest after a period of time to verify that we've fixed the things that they found the first time. And so having that retest included in the initial contract, with a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month lead time, whatever you're going to think you're going to need to fix that is really important to include. I strongly recommend that folks include that retest in their initial contract just from the beginning.
Yeah, I would agree. Where I sort of waver is, obviously there are some benefits to sticking with one pen test provider because they will have access to the report, right? So they'll be able to see, okay, what was found last time, make sure we test all that again. The one issue I would say is that you're never guaranteed, especially at pen test consultancies, to have the same tester the next time. It's definitely something you can ask, and I definitely would recommend it, because if you have a tester who's already, handled your application, they don't have to relearn the application. That's one thing a lot of customers maybe not forget, but don't understand or don't think about, is the fact that they have experience with their application. And as a pen tester, I'm seeing it for the very first time, usually on a scoping call, and now you want me to hack it. And the first day is honestly mostly just enumerating the application and learning it. So having a pen tester who's already tested the application and asking for them again is usually a good idea. And sometimes that'll work, but sometimes they might be booked on other tests. Sometimes they might have left the company. And so it is a tricky problem. But yeah, it's definitely recommended to stick with a pen test provider that you like, that has found stuff, and try and stick with the same pen tester for sure.
Was that helpful, Jim?
Yeah, that's great information. Really helpful as we start to think about our next steps as far as running some pen tests on our application. So thank you.
Best of luck with the testing, and hope things come up clean, and anything that you find, I hope it's valuable.
Or hopefully they find something that we really needed them to find and we can go fix it.
Yes, that's the right attitude. Love it. And our last question today is a listener mailbag question from Brent. And I'm not sure where Brent is from, but Brent writes in, penetration tests can be very expensive. And he wonders, what levers do I have available to affect the overall cost of having one done? And are there things that they should be sure to include or not include in order to make sure it's still valuable, but to manage the cost? It's a good question.
It is a good question. It has complicated answers, I think. The most obvious thing I can think of is obviously you can shop around. So there are many different pen test consultancies. They have different sort of ways of doing scoping. They have different hourly rates, daily rates. So it's always worth shopping around and seeing, roughly what the average cost of a pen test is. Now, I would also, as I mentioned, I think was Jared. We mentioned the reports, downloading or asking for sample reports, because one thing I think that's important is you have to sort of favor efficiency. All right. So if pen tests are already expensive, you don't want to be overpaying. You don't want to be paying for something that ultimately you don't really want or you don't like the result of in terms of the report. So finding a pen test company whose reports you like is extremely important as well. And then look at the number of days the various pen test consultancies are scoping, because I'm just going to use web applications as the example because that's what I know. But let's say 7 out of 10 pen testing companies you go to scope your web application as a 5-day test. 2 out of 10 scope it as a 3-day, and one says they need 7 days. Now, clearly the 3-day option is probably going to be cheaper, but 7 out of 10 went with a 5-day. That should tell you that, okay, the people doing or promising 3 days probably are underscoping it. So I would immediately stick to sort of around the average, do an average number of days that you get back, and sort of look at those options first. Because what you don't want is for you to pay for a pen test and them to miss something because they didn't have enough time. All right. And so that's what I would say for that as well. That's sort of efficiency, right? Way. So that's sort of the efficient thing to do. There's also things you can do, like other automated tools, right, that you can run first against your application to get a lot of the low-hanging fruit. All right. There are so many pen test reports that I've written, that I've seen, that include a ton of low-level issues. Usually it's stuff like, SSL configuration, headers that are misconfigured slightly. And you look at it and you think, okay, well, should it be in a pen test report? Yeah, it is technically a vulnerability, but it's a low severity vulnerability. And the problem with it is that takes time to write up. So if you can fix those low-level issues that you can just literally scan for with, several open source tools, if you can find and fix those before the pen test, then that's things that the pen tester doesn't have to write up ultimately. the other thing we can talk about is there's usually two types of pen test that consultancies will sell. There's the comprehensive pen test, which I have opinions about that I won't get into now, but effectively it means we'll test as much of the application as we can. And that's done by you do a scoping call, and the pen test they'll look at the application, and the consultancy will come back with a number of days that they think they can test the application in. And then there's a time boxed test. And the time box test is basically, okay, well, let's say that the consultancy says we need 10 days to comprehensively test this application, but a 10-day pen test is very expensive. You might say, okay, well, we can only afford 5 days. Can you test within those 5 days? And that would be a time box. The idea being we test for 5 days and that's it. We're not going to test any further than that. The caveat being the report is obviously going to be incomplete, right? There may be vulnerabilities that are missed. And that might seem like a bad thing, but you can sort of, as a customer, you can have a little bit of leverage there by saying, okay, we can't afford the long 10-day pen test. We're going to have to go with time boxed. But realistically, we don't want you to focus on the stuff that we can easily find using automated scanning tools that we already use. We want you to focus on the really major issues, the access control issues, for example, right? That's what we talked about with Jim. We want you to focus on like the really obscure stuff. We really are interested in what a pen tester would find, not what an automated scanning engine would find. And I feel like that's how you're going to get the most value out of a time-boxed engagement, is to say, okay, we understand that you're limited in time, but try and focus on the vulnerabilities that only a human is going to be able to find.
Working with your engineering team, maybe your infrastructure team or DevOps team, or whatever you call that, the group that sort of runs the service operations and supports the software developers. If you work with that team, you may be able to get them to give you, kind of their top 3 things of like, what are the things that you really want to make sure that they're looking for here? And that can help you scope down, like what Tiberius is talking about here too. And it gets that, internal perspective of the folks who intimately know the application, and know that, where there might be issues, and, they can kind of point to that. And by being able to tell the testers, we're specifically concerned about like these 3 things. This is why. And like that bit of context can really help them focus. And in a time box test, especially, make the best use of that time as well. So yeah, I agree completely. Man, another fantastic episode. I always love all of the questions and the conversations that come out of them. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that you want to offer our listeners based on the conversation today and the questions?
Oh goodness! Now you put me on the spot. I think it goes back to the magic wand question that you asked in the first part, which is, and my answer to that, which is you always kind of have to have security at the forefront of your mind, especially when running a business that ultimately will at some point deal with computer systems, with computer networks, with customer data. I know it's not a popular term in the US. We generally refer to it as cybersecurity over here, but in Europe, it's known as information security. And in a lot of cases, that's the more apt description, right? We are protecting information. We're securing information from attackers. And so I think you always have to, if whatever business decision you make, whatever application decision you make, new features, you have to think about it and keep security sort of there in focus. You can't have it as an afterthought, because if you have it as an afterthought, you run the risk of forgetting about it or deprioritizing it. And ultimately what's going to happen then is your information is not going to be secure, and you will at some point get hacked, and that's not just going to damage the company reputation. That's going to lose you customers. It's going to lose you money, and it's extremely easy to sort of forget that fact, I think.
Jim's comment was really fantastic at the end. And that outlook of, we want the penetration testers to find stuff so that we have the ability to fix them before somebody else finds them and uses them maliciously. And I think going into these tests, like, that really is the right attitude. Like, at the end of the day, like, everybody wants the system to come up clean. Every CEO is going to want the pen test to come up clean, and nope, you guys did everything right, perfect score, 100%, you're good. But in his case, it's the CTO who's accountable for the technology and the software. Like, if there are any problems, like, sure, would love it to be clean, but I feel better when they find something that we can now go fix, and we feel like we've done something to make progress and improve things. And I always like to talk to the team about, when they do this, like, nobody's gonna be in trouble for what they find. Like, this is to get better. And that's a big part of then the attitude that leadership needs to be bought in on, is nobody's in trouble for this. This is an internal exercise, and we want to get better. If they find stuff, we're going to fix it and make ourselves better, and keep moving forward. So it's something that can be scary to find out the information, and especially some of the vulnerabilities that come up can be terrifying, especially to non-technical leaders, when they think the system has been 100% secure, and then they find out, like, oh, we got a window left open over here. So yeah, I love that attitude. I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I'd want callers to come away from this episode too. So Tiberius, where can folks find you online if they want to follow up or, look up and subscribe to any of the content that you create? Because you're putting out a lot of great stuff.
Thank you. I think the easiest is to go to my link tree, because I'm pretty much on every social media platform. But I have my link tree / Tiberius. Tiberius is spelled with a 3 instead of an E, because I'm one of those old school hackers who loves numbers in their name. But yeah, if you go to that website or Tiberius.com, you should be able to find a bunch of links to my social media there. Like I said, I'm pretty much active on most of them.
Thank you, Tiberius, for joining me. It's been fantastic having you on the show here with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been amazing.
And thank you to our listeners as well. We do this for you and want this to be valuable. And if you're still listening now at the end of the show, especially, thank you for continuing to listen all the way to this point. So, I am Accidental CISO, and until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.